This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Welcome to the AIPIS show for accredited income property investment specialists and those who aspire to be. If you're a real estate, mortgage, or financial professional, this is the place for you. We'll explore innovative investment analysis, sales, marketing, and income-generating strategies for the most historically proven wealth creator, income property. Learn from the experts as they show you how to build a better business and a better life.
Welcome to the show. This is Jason Hartman, your host, and every 10th episode, we do something kind of special, kind of different. What we do is we go off topic. So regardless of which show it is on the Hartman Media Network, whether it be one of the financial shows, economics, real estate investing, travel, longevity, all of the other topics that we have, every 10th episode, we go off topic and we explore something of general interest, something of general life success value. And so many of our listeners around the world in 164 countries have absolutely loved our 10th episode shows. So that's what we're going to do today. And let's go ahead and get to our guest with a special 10th episode show. And of course, on the next episode, we'll be back to our regular programming. Here we go. It's my pleasure to welcome Tal Ben-Shahar. He is the co-founder of the Happiness Studies Academy and Potential Life, the New York Times bestseller of Happier, Learn the Secrets to Daily Joy and Lasting Fulfillment, and Choose the Life You Want, 101 Ways to Create Your Own Road to Happiness, and his newest book, Shortcuts to Happiness, Life-Changing Lessons from My Barber. Tal, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good. It's good to have you on. So here is a subject with talk about broad, wide-ranging appeal, right? Who doesn't want to be happier, right? You actually participate in I think it's called the Happiness Summit. This is something, I believe, sponsored by the United Nations. And this is where we see all those rankings of the world's happiest countries, right?
Yeah, so the United Nations for the past few years has looked into the happiest nations in the world. The findings are quite interesting. We don't find the countries we expect to be at the top there. So countries that regularly appear at the top are Denmark, Norway, and then Colombia and Israel and Costa Rica. And the interesting question is always why? Why these countries and not the wealthiest countries in the world?
And I totally get that they're not the wealthiest. But before we address why are these the happiest, I'd like to know how they rate such a thing. I mean, it's a soft subject, right?
It is. No, that's a very good and important question. If you'd asked me this question 30 years ago, I would have had problems responding. Today, though, we have very good measures of happiness, some of them objective measures. We look at people's brains, we scan them, we know what a happy brain looks like, we know what a compassionate or a depressed brain looks like. While we mostly still today use questionnaires, there is a significant overlap, correlation between or among the different measures, the direct brain measures, other physiological measures, as well as the self-report.
And you're talking about fMRIs, functional magnetic resonance imaging,
exactly.
Right?
MRIs or fMRIs, PET scans, EEGs, they can all give us a hint. And what's very important when you do research is to use different methods, whether it's direct brain scans, whether it's self-report, whether it's other people reporting about levels of happiness.
Mm-hmm. How do you know what a happy brain is from a scan? How can a scan tell you that? Is it like a questionnaire and then the person gets into the machine and then you scan them and say, okay, this person says they're happy and that's what how their scan looks. Is that what they do?
Yes, you could do that. However, the way people measure happiness levels is they look at what areas of the brain are more active. So for example, we know that people with more activation, neural activation, that is, in the left prefrontal cortex, that's just the front side of your brain, they tend to be happier. People with more activation on the right, they actually tend towards depression.
That's interesting. So what is activation? Does it just mean keeping oneself busy and engaged in life, or does it mean something else?
No, it means that this place is working, that the neurons there are firing. So, just like you have, you work at something, neurons are also working. They're either on or off. And if particular neurons, particular area in the brain are working, well, that means you're happier or less happy, or experiencing empathy or sadness.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
So the interesting thing about the finding about national levels of happiness is that there's only one thing that predicts happiness levels on a national level, and that is relationships. So countries that emphasize, where the people emphasize social connections, real relationships, where they prioritize it, these are the countries that are happiest. And again, these are the, interestingly, in Denmark, 93% of the population are members of social clubs. This is active members, could be in their church or sailing club or mahjong club. It actually doesn't matter, but they're active members. In countries like Israel and Colombia, countries you wouldn't expect people to be happy with, all given the political issues that these countries have had to endure. In these countries, friendships and family relationships are very important, are central to the ethos. And that's why they're among the happiest countries in the world consistently. In contrast, countries like the United States or the UK, Germany, Singapore, Korea are far from being at the top of the ranking, because relationships very often are taking a back seat to other pursuits.
Yeah. So are they taking a back seat to capitalism then?
Not specifically to capitalism, specifically to success. And, people don't realize, unfortunately, that it is possible to have the best of both worlds. So to cultivate relationships and to be successful. In fact, in the long term, if you do focus on relationships, you will have more fuel, more energy for the road ahead.
Right. And those relationships also, from maybe a business perspective, represent networking and connections. And maybe they can turn out to do something for you in your career as well. But hey, I guess maybe to broach this subject, everybody needs to get rich enough and successful enough to be able to afford to join a country club, and then they'll be happy, right?
Well, that's one way of looking at it. However, you don't need to be member of the most expensive country club.
Right.
Just having a nice dinner at your local diner with friends or at home, that generates just as much of what I've come to call the ultimate currency, which is the currency of happiness.
Sure. Okay. So actually taking time for connection, drill down on that. There's got to be more to it, right? It's not just about connecting and having relationships. I mean, what else? Yeah,
before I drill down, if I can go, from national level to individual level.
Absolutely,
so, Harvard conducted, by now, a famous study over a period of 75 years where they followed their graduates as well as community members for 75 years. For most of them, it was their entire life. And they collected literally millions of data points. And what they found was that the best predictor of both happiness as well as health, in other words, both mental and physical health, number one predictor, relationships. Now, the interesting thing about this, and this is where we can dig a little bit deeper, the interesting thing was that it didn't matter what kind of relationships, meaning for some of them it was a romantic partner whom they spent their life with. For others it was, family. For others it was close friends. For others it was business relationships. But these relationships were, here is the thing, they were real, they were authentic. And this is especially important in today's world. Unfortunately, 1,000 friends on social media are no substitute for those, one or two intimate, real relationships.
In fact, it might be making you less happy, because there's all kinds of studies, which I'm sure you are well aware of, that show that people that spend a lot of time on social media develop a lot of very envious traits, and it actually it deepens separation from people, oddly. It's sort of a double-edged sword. I mean, it is good, but like anything in life, right, it needs to be kept in its place, I guess.
Yes. So Eric Kleinberg, who's at NYU, is a sociologist, has shown that the more time people spend on social media, the lonelier they in fact are. So that's one area, as you point out, that leads to unhappiness. The second element that you also point to is the social comparison. Mm-hmm. What do we see on social media? We see everyone being perfectly happy,
right?
With perfect job, perfect family, perfect vacation, perfect life, and we compare ourselves to it, and we fall short of that. And then this upward social comparison we engage in is making us miserable.
But doesn't everybody know that? I mean, maybe it hits us at a different level subconsciously versus consciously, right? Because I always like to say, we live in an era where everybody is basically running their own self-styled PR firm. And, and it's pretty ridiculous. And talk about keeping up with the Joneses. It's worse than ever now. All the things people post, they sort of have a positive bent because people don't want to be negative and heck, negative people aren't very attractive, right? So, maybe we want to be attractive to each other and be positive about things, right? But the person who's looking at their news feed has to know, because they're probably doing it too. They don't just think, oh, everybody else's life is perfect and my life is lousy because I don't post stuff like that. I mean, I don't know.
Yes, we know it on a conscious level. However, as Freud's metaphor is, the conscious is only the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, fair enough.
The subconscious is not doing that processing that you just went through. In other words, what's happening is that subconscious is thinking everyone is having an amazing time and I'm feeling miserable right now. That is the inner implicit conversation going on. And it's like... you look at the magazine covers, or, and a couple of my students have done research on this and self-esteem. And girls and women know that these are photoshopped images and that there are only, a handful of, supermodels. And yet this is what the subconscious is comparing them to, and it's hurting their self-esteem. Same with social media.
Tell us about your barber. What are some of these lessons that you learned from your barber?
Yeah, I must say the first lesson that I learned from my barber is that you can learn lessons from your barber.
Okay.
So for the past 30 years, I've been an academic. I've delved into academic journals and ancient texts and modern research. And here, I went to my barber and I realized that I was actually feeling great after a haircut. And great not just because he made me look better, because he made me feel better. And I started writing a book about him and basically collecting his pearls of wisdom over a period of 2 years. And many of these pearls of wisdom, I then found similar ideas in Aristotle and Lao Tzu 2,500 years ago, or Marty Seligman and Sonia Lyubomirsky, who are doing research in positive psychology today.
Talk to us about, for example, the lesson on relationships from your barber.
So my barber, again, didn't read the Harvard study on relationships or others, and yet he understood that in order to lead a happy life, he needs to spend quality time with people he cares about. Moreover, when we came into his salon, phones were off. He encouraged us to be engaged with one another. And he didn't need fMRIs to show the impact of social media and social comparison. He understood it. So relationships was one thing. The other thing was also, interestingly, silence and the value of silence. So there is one of my friends who writes in the area of leadership, talks about how silence is the sound of thinking. And that's so important. It's so important for managers and leaders to spend more time in silence. And it's not something that's done enough because we feel very uncomfortable. We even have the phrase awkward silence. And yet these periods of silence are critical for self-development and self-growth.
Yeah, I love that line from The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. Of course, everybody knows the book. He says, you talk when you cease to be at peace with yourself. Talks about the importance of silence. So very, very good point. What else? Maybe another lesson. How about anger? Does anger serve a useful purpose, or is it all bad?
So anger, first of all, is natural. And yes, it has an evolutionary reason and basis. However, most of the time when we get angry, it doesn't serve us. And, it reminds me, one of the stories that I tell in the book about Avi happened when I was having my haircut and a woman walked in to have her haircut and she was seething. And Avi, the barber, asked her, what's wrong? And she said, I just got cut off by this idiot, and, I can't believe he did that. And she went on and on. And then he says, can I share with you what I do when I'm cut off? And she said, sure. And he said, if I'm waiting for a parking spot and the car comes out and I'm about to go in, but then an SUV comes in, cuts me off and takes my spot, what I do then is, and we were waiting for probably, I beat him up or something like that, because obviously he's a strong guy. He says, what I do is that I imagine that a cow just cut me off.
Would you be mad at the cow, right?
Yeah, and we said, what? And, both of us were laughing. And he said, exactly. Because if I think of a cow, I start laughing. I don't get angry. Mm-hmm. Now, this is a very simple technique that, by the way, I've been using ever since. And it's a technique where he didn't know it, but there is actually research showing that we can't experience two conflicting emotions at the same time. So I can't experience amusement and anger, or empathy and hatred at the same time. And then what happens when you think of a cow and you experience amusement, you're no longer angry at it and at that person. And it's not worth being angry at the person. And we can use this in a work situation when we're with a client who's upsetting us, or we can use it with our children when they upset us, or our partner. So it's a very simple and useful technique. Think of a cow cutting you off.
Yeah, okay, right. Well, just the other day last week, a giant, and I mean giant, and forgive me if I get it wrong, but I guess it was an iguana. I don't know, this huge prehistoric looking creature cut me off on the road, and I had to wait for it to walk by. And it was a scary, ugly looking creature. But, I took a picture of it and thought, ooh, and I moved on. I didn't get mad. If that was a person, I might have, I admit, I was in a rush when it happened. And, I'm in Florida, so we have that kind of thing down here. And I would have probably, if nothing else, sort of slapped my hand on the steering wheel, like, what is this guy doing? So yeah, that's a good point. The cow is a good one. All right. What else? Maybe another topic area from your barber.
Sure. So one of the things that he often would talk about is raising children, and then he would bring it to the level of business as well. And one of those things was praise. Now, it's very important, of course, to praise children. It's important to praise our partner. It's important to praise our employees. And yet how we praise them is even more important, because there's research. Again, he didn't know about this research. He does this intuitively. There's research by Stanford professor Carol Dweck on praising. And what she shows is that when we praise children, for example, for how smart they are or how beautiful they are, that's actually unhelpful in the long term. Why? Because if I'm praised for how smart I am, all I have to do is protect my self-image, and then I won't take any risks. And then I will not necessarily try. I will just try to avoid seeming not smart. In contrast, praising for effort, for hard work, that's helpful. It's helpful for children, and it's also helpful for employees. Because when I'm praised for hard work, I can always work hard. I can always invest. I can always work harder, or usually. And that's helpful. And when I saw him, praise his children for their effort rather than for their accomplishments or how beautiful or how smart they are, that was an important reminder of this research by Carol Dweck that can really make a difference.
But are you praising them for real effort, or is it more like the concept of the participation trophy? And I gotta, maybe I'll play devil's advocate here for a moment, but it almost seems to me like we have in many ways ruined a generation. And I'm talking about the millennials, maybe the Gen Z after them too. Probably every generation thinks this about the one that comes after them to some extent. But we have just catered to these kids. We have made them feel good. We have told them they're great. And, a lot of them just aren't that great. Okay? They're really not putting forth a lot of effort. There are a lot of spoiled brats out there who do not exert themselves, they're not rigorous with themselves at all. I mean, it's like, does everybody just deserve a compliment all the time and, an award for just showing up? I mean, that sort of leads to the world owes me a living type of attitude, doesn't it?
I couldn't agree more. I think this is a huge issue. It's a huge issue with the young kids, and then obviously it spills over to the workplace later on when they leave home. praise has to be, first of all, it has to be real. If there was no effort, then obviously don't praise for effort. They asked Jack Welch, and I remember reading this article back in 2000 when he was elected as the CEO, the manager of the 20th century. I think it was Fortune magazine. He was asked, what advice do you have for managers? And he said, my advice is learn to face reality. And if parents don't teach their children to face reality, then they're setting them up for failure. Failure in the conventional sense, also failure, emotional failure in the ultimate currency. Parents' role is to be a mirror, to reflect reality for the children. So absolutely, first of all, based on reality. Then if there was effort and success, focus on the effort.
Right. Okay. So I guess maybe the key to that is whether it be your friend, your partner, your kids, employee, whatever, be sensitive enough to find the areas, and maybe it takes some effort, right, where they really are making an effort, and then make the praise real. But don't just arbitrarily do it, because, in a sense, that's lazy on our part, isn't it? When we're just sort of arbitrarily saying, oh, you're making such a great effort, when they're really not, right?
Yes, it's lazy, and it's also, it's the easy way out, because, kids enjoy it, certainly in the short term when they're told they're good, but in the long term, we're really hurting them, and I see it so often. I see it with my students. I see it with also the young working adults.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's talk about a couple more questions here just before we wrap it up. Is happiness a currency?
Yes, it is a currency by which we take measure of our life, whether we do it consciously or not. If you ask someone, if you give someone $1 billion, but $1 billion, and these are Martian dollars that you will never be able to actually use, then it's worthless. However, in the same way, money is only worth if it can be translated into happiness. If I told you, I will give you $1 billion now, but then you're guaranteed misery for the rest of your life. Now, if you actually believe me that that's true, you won't take those $1 billion because ultimately what you want is happiness. So the reason we want money is because we truly believe that it will make us happy, again, beyond survival needs, of course.
Right.
And that's why I call happiness the ultimate currency, because it's the currency by which we ultimately take measure of our lives. Every other currency we translate explicitly or implicitly to the currency of happiness.
Yeah. So I think people get very off track and confused there when they think somehow pursuit of money to any degree at all will make you unhappy. And that's just such a silly idea. They use these few examples they've heard. Well, money doesn't buy happiness. Well, neither does poverty, right? But there is a prudent middle ground in there somewhere, isn't there? Because you don't want to be a slave to anything. Money should not be the master.
That's right. So basic needs are critical for happiness. We talked earlier about national levels happiness. Countries that are poor, contrary to what many people think, they're actually in general very unhappy there. People who have no money, and then you give them an extra $1,000 a month, money will make them happier for sure. However, beyond basic needs, additional money does not make us happier.
Right, yeah. What else should people know before you go? Just any question I haven't asked you?
Perhaps the first step to happiness is allowing in unhappiness. So there's a common misconception today that the happy life is a life devoid of painful emotions, when in fact painful emotions, sadness, anger, envy, disappointment, frustration, anxiety, these are all natural human emotions. We all experience them. The question is what we do when we experience them. One thing we can do is reject them and chastise ourselves for experiencing them, and then they only intensify, they only grow stronger. In contrast, if we accept them, embrace them as a part and parcel of our life, of any life, in fact, then they don't overstay their welcome. So it's when we allow in unhappiness, embrace painful emotions as natural, give ourselves the permission to be human, that's when we open ourselves up for pleasure. And in fact, Khalil Gibran, whom you quoted earlier, talks exactly
talks about that. You were making me think of it. The deeper you carve into your being. Yeah. Go ahead and say that. I can't remember it, but I do remember.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact word, but it's the deeper the sorrow, the more open you are, the more you can accept and take in the joy in life.
I always found that interesting, that the more hardship one endures, and you don't want to intentionally go out and endure hardship, obviously, right? But if you don't have some of that in your life, you just don't have a reference point to appreciate when it's good, do you?
The point also is that you learn a lot when you experience hardship. One of my ex-colleagues, Ann Arbison, said the following. She said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste."
Well, Rahm Emanuel said that too in a political way, and people didn't like it too much. Go ahead.
Right, and we learn and grow from hardship. Clay Christensen talks about how the best leaders are the ones who do experience hardships and difficulties earlier on in life. There's actually a strong correlation between failure, difficulties, hardships, and ultimate success. One of the sound bites that I repeat to my students and to my children as well as to my clients is learn to fail or fail to learn. There is no other way. That's how we learn how to walk. That's how we learn how to eat. That's how we learn to be in a healthy relationship. And that's how we learn to manage.
I couldn't agree more. That's excellent. And, Seneca said one must wait until evening to see how splendid the day has been. So having that point of comparison, I mean, we're just full of quotes today, aren't we? Having that point of comparison is very important. Give out your website and wrap it up for us.
Yes, so my website is Tal Ben-Shahar. That's TalBenshahar.com. And there you can find links to my books on leadership, on happiness, as well as links to my online classes.
Fantastic. Tal, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.